Father, we thank you again for allowing us to come out today and for giving us the freedom and the safety. And thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving us your word. We ask you to bless this time and to open our minds and just to help us absorb. And I'm sure we've all been through it over and over again, but as we look at the price that was paid for our salvation, we just thank you so much for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, officially we're going through the book of Matthew. But last week we read the trial part of what Jesus went through in Matthew, and then we went to Luke because it gives some details that Matthew doesn't. So, although our class officially is in the book of Matthew, go to the book of Luke. We'll be back in Matthew in a little bit. We're going to kind of bounce back and forth between Matthew and Luke and look at a few things in John also today. So, okay, Luke 23. We got partway into that last week and we ran out of time, but I want to go back to verse 6, just to kind of give you a little feel for where we're at. We left off with 11, but let's start in 6, and I'll just read through those few verses. When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked whether the man or Jesus were a Galilean. And as soon as he knew that he belonged unto Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself also was at Jerusalem at that time. And when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he was desirous to see him of a long season, because he had heard many things of him, and he hoped to have seen some miracle done by him. Now that doesn't, I know we talked about this last week, but if you weren't here, that doesn't mean Herod was hoping to see Jesus for the right reasons. He'd heard a lot about him, and he wanted to see a miracle. He wanted to, I've heard about the show you're putting on. I want to see some of it. At least that's what I'm getting out of it, because Herod definitely wasn't looking to be a follower of Jesus. Anyway, verse 9, then he questioned with him in many words, but he answered him nothing. And the chief priests and the scribes stood and vehemently accused him. They're tracking this whole thing. No matter where Jesus goes, he's gone from Caiaphas to Pilate, now he's with Herod. They're right behind with their accusations. And Herod with his men of war set him at naught and mocked him and arrayed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him again to Pilate. So now this is where we left off last week. Now they're sending him from Herod back to Pilate. Excuse me just a minute while I unwrap this thing. It's noisy with that mic, isn't it? Okay, verse 12. This is interesting. And the same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together. They both examined Jesus. They both really didn't find anything worth executing him over for sure. But they were made friends that day. For before they were at enmity between themselves. Isn't that interesting? That event caused them to, now they have I don't even know how to explain this, or if I'm even going to explain it right. But these two guys didn't get along, but after both dealing with Jesus and agreeing that, not that they were necessarily on his side, but they didn't find a reason to put him to death. Because all of a sudden they became friends. Now how much that had to do with it, we're not given any details. It's just interesting. But they all of a sudden were friends, and up till now they were enemies. Now Jesus is back with Pilate in verse 13. And just a second. I got notes and scribbles and this and that. I guess let me take just a second and tell you that I'm not a multitasker. To be honest with you, I don't know anybody that is, but there's people that claim to be. Watch them for a while, you might get a different story. But anyway, not enough of that. I'm trying to cover at least most of the events that happened to Jesus, and I've been looking back and forth. I didn't even use Mark, but between Matthew, Luke, and John, I've been kind of jumping back and forth and writing things down. And I don't think I organized it real well. I'm just telling you that up front. So if I get a few of these things a little bit out of place, I apologize for that, but they're still important and they're still things that happened to Jesus. So before we go to verse 13, in Luke 23, go to John 18. Because there's something mentioned here that wasn't mentioned in the other two books that we're looking at. And we'll read a few verses, then we'll come back here to Luke. John 18, and verse 28. Well, there's a little conversation here. John 18:28. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment, and it was early, and they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out unto them, and said, What accusation bring ye against this man? And they answered and said unto him, If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee. In other words, well, he had to do something wrong or we wouldn't have brought him here. Okay, do with that whatever you want. Then said Pilate unto them, Take ye him and judge him according to your law. The Jews therefore said unto him, It is not lawful for us to put any man to death. That's not even the reason I turned to John, but to make that statement, what did they say back in Matthew when Caiaphas, who's the high priest, I'll get these names all messed up. That's who Pilate is talking to. What did he say when Jesus said, You shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds, or however he said that? He said he is worthy of death. That's the conclusion they came to. So now he says, Well, it's not lawful for us to put any man to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. This again, it's kind of a side point, but it's important. If the Jews would have executed him, how would they have done it? Stoning, that's right. Jesus already told them how he was going to die, so they didn't have to, knowing that he had to die that way, but it had to happen this way. They had to get him into the hands of the Romans so he could be crucified, rather than being stoned. Just all those little details that as you read through this, I don't always give it a lot of thought. God worked all those things, even as terrible as that is, he worked out every little detail so it would happen exactly the way it was said it was gonna. Verse 33, Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, and called Jesus, and said unto him, Art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, saying, Sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it of me? It's an interesting question. Did you figure this out all by yourself? You're not really, you're Pilate. You're a Roman governor. How did you even come up with this? Was it you or somebody else tell you? And Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Thine own nation and chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? So he did answer the question. Yeah, your buddies, the other Jews, told me about it. But what hast thou done? Here's the part I really wanted to get to, the next couple verses. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said unto him, art thou a king then? And I understand Pilate's confusion. Jesus answered, thou sayest that I am a king. Now listen to this next statement. To this end was I born, to go to the cross where he's headed. And he says more, and we're going to read it in just a second, but think about something with me. Each one of us was born, right? At least I think we were. Pretty good chance. And Jesus was born. But how many people were born for a specific purpose? I don't know if there's any. Well, maybe John the Baptist. That was kind of a unique birth. But Jesus was born for this specific thing, to make payment for our sins, to go to the cross. And he's telling Herod that, and he adds more to it also. Thou sayest that I am a king, to this end was I born. And for this cause came I into the world, and then he explains it, that I should bear witness of the truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice. That's quite a statement if you just sit there and look at it and read it slowly and let it sink in, that I should bear witness of the truth. Have we seen, do we see today, how long do you have to wait? How far do you have to look to start finding lies about anything? Jesus came to bear witness of the truth, and he was born for this end that he's facing. That's pretty incredible statement to me. Okay, let's go back to Luke. Luke 23. Verse 13. And Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people, said unto them, Ye have brought this man unto me as one that perverteth the people. And behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man, touching those things whereof ye accuse him. Remember, I think it was last week, I got it written down here somewhere, but there's 4 or 5 times when Pilate declared him not guilty. He didn't necessarily take sides with Jesus, but he didn't deserve what he was getting, and especially what he was about to get. And Pilate understood that. But there's a pressure being applied to Pilate. I think we talked about that a little bit last week. We'll see it come up again here pretty quick. I have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof ye accuse him. No, nor yet Herod. Remember, he just went to Herod. Herod questioned him, sent him back to Pilate, said, this guy didn't do anything wrong. No, nor yet Herod, for I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. I will therefore he just got done saying what about Jesus? He didn't do anything wrong, right? But in 16 he says, I will therefore chastise him and release him. Now, if I've got this straight in my own mind, other accounts said he was scourged. And I'm kind of making an assumption this is the same thing. Scourging is a pretty severe beating to do with no reason. Found this man not guilty. He didn't do what you accused him of, but I'm going to have him beaten anyway. And release him. I will therefore chastise him and release him. Probably hoping it's going to appease the crowd and the accusers. I can't say that for sure. For of necessity he must release one unto them at the feast. And they cried out all at once, saying, Away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas. Now we get a little description here of Barabbas that Matthew didn't cover. Who for certain sedition made in the city, we're not told what that is, and for murder was cast into prison. Pilate therefore, willing to release Jesus, spake again unto them. See, he did have a plan. He's willing to release Jesus, but he had to give them the option. And I don't understand how all that worked, but that was something that they did. But he's trying to give Jesus a way out. But they cried, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. And he said unto them the third time, Why, what evil hath he done? I have found no cause of death in him. I will therefore chastise him and let him go. He just repeats himself. And they were instant with loud voices, requiring that he might be crucified. Listen to this. And the voices of them and of the chief priests prevailed. Pilate was the Roman governor. He had some authority. But the crowd was persistent and loud enough that they convinced him to do otherwise. Something other than what he knew he should have done. Okay, we're still jumping around. Go to John 19. A few details here that were not given in some of the other books. John 19, verse 1. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him with their hands. Pilate therefore went forth again and said unto them, Behold, I bring him forth unto you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests therefore and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Take ye him and crucify him. I find no fault in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went again into the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then saith Pilate unto him, I'm bad today. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee and power to release thee? And he did. according to the Roman government, Jesus is going to put him in his place. Jesus answered, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me except it were given thee from above." Given him from above to do what he's about to do. Think about that. "Therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend." That's the statement that changed Pilate's mind. "Whosoever make himself a king speaketh against Caesar." When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth and sat down in the judgment seat in the place that is called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said unto the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said unto them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Remember what they just told him. Then delivered he him, therefore, unto them to be crucified. And they took Jesus and led him away. In John, where we just read that, the pressure that had been put on Pilate by the crowd, first the screaming and the crowd and the leaders of the Jews, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders and everyone else was just out to get Jesus. And Pilate tried and tried and tried to defend him. But when they brought that thing up about Caesar, anyone who makes himself a king is not a friend of Caesar. Caesar is Pilate's boss. He's number one guy of the whole Roman Empire. And I think at that time, Pilate made that decision that, man, I know this ain't right, but if I defend this guy that's calling himself a king, Caesar's going to come down on me. Well, look at that. Would you call that political pressure, I guess? And I'm going to mention it, but I don't want to get into a discussion. Same thing's used today. Those tactics are used in everyday life all the time, and they work. That's why they're still used. All right, back to Luke 23. Verse 23, we read it, we'll read it one more time, then we'll continue. "And they were instant with loud voices requiring that he might be crucified." And we're not told, but it belongs right there, that incident about he called himself a king, and anyone who's a king, calls himself a king, is not the friend of Caesar. And the voice of them and of the chief priests prevailed. That's how they convinced him. And Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they required. And he released unto them him that had for sedition and murder was cast into prison, whom they had desired. But he delivered Jesus to their will. Not his will. It wasn't something he wanted to do. And I'm not trying to make a hero out of Pilate, but the facts that the Bible gives us, Pilate was against this. He got pressured he buckled under pressure, but it wasn't something he wanted. He delivered Jesus to their will. They wanted him crucified. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon, a Cyrenian, coming out of the country. And on him they laid the cross, that he might bear it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him, But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps that never gave suck. In other words, if you had children, and Jesus mentioned this before, and we won't necessarily go back and look at it, but when he told about how the Romans were finally going to overthrow Jerusalem and just wipe everyone out, tear down the temple and everything else, he makes a similar statement to that. Then shall they begin to say unto the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? I think another place talking about a different situation, but he said if they do it in the open, what are they going to do when nobody's looking? And I don't know if that's the same exact statement or not. I looked in a couple commentaries, and I don't know. I guess take verse 31 and chew on it. That's what I'm doing. I'm chewing on it. Verse 32, and there were also 2 malefactors led with him to be put to death. Okay, that concludes the part of Jesus' suffering that happened before the cross. Is that enough? Is that too much? In my mind, of course it is. Of course it is. Now it gets worse. And we'll go back to Matthew. Matthew 27, verse 35. And they crucified him and parted his garments, casting lots that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And sitting down, they watched him there. I don't know, that statement just hits me. Sitting there watching, waiting for him to die. And set up over his head this accusation, or his accusation written, This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Remember what changed Pilate's mind when they told him that because he calls himself a king, he's not Caesar's friend, and that threatened Pilate. And Pilate's the one that wrote this. This is Jesus, King of the Jews. Still jumping around, go to John 19. Another detail that's left out here in Matthew. John 19, verse 19. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city. And it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Then said the chief priests of the Jews to Pilate, Write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am King of the Jews. And I don't know if this is a prophetic thing in verse 22 or if Pilate was just done with it. That's the direction I lean. But Pilate answered, What I have written, I have written. I'm not going to change it. But the people were even against the saying that calling him king of the Jews. And that was the accusation that actually got him crucified. Hey, back to Matthew 27, verse 38. Then were the two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and another on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, Thou that destroyest the temple and buildest it in 3 days. Remember, that was one of the false accusations. Save thyself. If thou be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Can you imagine? I can't imagine hanging on a cross under those conditions and what he's been through, but just hearing what people were saying as he hung there and suffered. Likewise also, the chief priests, mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the king of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. Do what you want with that statement. I ain't buying it. He trusted in God. Let him deliver now, if he will have him. I don't know about the rest of you, but that statement cuts me like a knife. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Not understanding, I'm not going to turn there right now. We might a little bit later. But in Isaiah 53, where it gives a description of what Jesus went through hundreds of years before it happened, makes me think of that statement they make there, if he will have him. God gave Jesus over for this because of his love for us. If he will have him, you better believe he'll have him. But he had to turn his back on him for him to be able to make that sacrifice. So the chief priest here, or whoever made that statement, it was almost like they understood, but they were so far from understanding. But he trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. The thieves also, which were crucified with him, cast the same in his teeth. They were agreeing with everyone else. Now from the 6th hour, there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. That's from noon, our time, the way we keep track of time now. That's from noon till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That isn't, I don't care where you are, that ain't when darkness happens. So in the middle of the day, it turns dark for 3 hours. As Jesus is hanging on the cross, and the statements he makes during those next 3 hours, it really explain a lot, and we're going to look at them a little later. We're going to look at one in just a minute, but I just wonder how many people, God doesn't do anything without a reason. I don't always understand the reason, but he didn't make it turn dark for 3 hours he was making a statement. I'm going to mess up I'm putting words in God's mouth, and maybe I shouldn't do that, but this is what's going through my brain. I'm going to give you 3 hours of darkness while this is happening in the middle of the day, so this thing sinks in and you take record of it, take note of it. This is a big deal. I might be wrong on that, but That's, like I said, that's the way I'm looking at the 3 hours of darkness. He was getting people's attention. Verse 46, and about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now think for a minute about who Jesus is and was. Not that he's changed. And we skipped Matthew. We'll pick it up. We'll look at Luke and I think John, some other verses. What happened in those 3 hours that we just skipped? But this is at the 9th hour, or the 9th hour, right? Yes. Started at the 6th hour. This is at 3 in the afternoon when he makes that statement. Why hast thou forsaken me? I don't know of another place. I don't know if there is one. There may be, where Jesus referred to God the Father as his God. He may have, but most of the time he referred to him as his Father. But now, having taken on flesh and having, over these last 3 hours, which we really haven't dug into yet, but just because of the way Matthew's written, not calling him Father, but calling him my God. Why hast thou forsaken? Why did you turn your back on me? The only person that's ever had a perfect relationship with God, never sinned once in his life, and was part of the Godhead. I hope you understand that. Always was in partnership with the Father. Never a disagreement. You know, I don't know if I would have liked to or not, but was there a conversation before creation about all this? Because Jesus volunteered for it before the foundation of the world, that he would be willing to take on flesh and go through this for us. Now we're 2,000 years past it, but it still is changing lives, changing hearts. Anyway, I'm just trying to show you that relationship that they must have had, because I can't even understand it. But now for these 3 hours at the end of it, he makes that statement, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, we know the answer. He had to be the sacrificial lamb. But anyway, we'll continue here for a few more verses, and then we'll look at some of the other statements that he made during that 3 hours. Verse 47, some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, this man calleth for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. And the rest said, let us see whether Elias will come to save him. Verse 50. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. He makes I hope I can find it. Give me just a second, I'm sorry. Pardon?
Luke 46.
Let me look. You may be right. gave up the ghost. Wait a minute. Matthew 27:51. I wrote it down. Well, I thought I wrote it down somewhere, but Jesus made a statement that I give my life, no man taketh it from me. In a different place. Here it says he yielded up the ghost. Pardon? John 10:18. Let's take a look at that. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. That's important. Very important. John chapter 10, verse 18. Yes. Verse 17. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. There's that relationship again, because Jesus agreed to do this. My Father loves me because I lay down my life, that I may take it again. And then here's the verse I really wanted to look at. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. Okay, back to Matthew. Verse 50, Jesus then cried again with a loud voice and yielded up the ghost. He was not killed by anybody. He yielded up the ghost. I know if you've been around for a while, when Bruce does his Munchkin moments from time to time, he likes to use that word, and I appreciate it, and he's 100% accurate in doing that. We need to yield to Jesus Christ. But that's a different kind of yield. He's 100% right when he says that. When you come to a yield sign, that means you give other people the right. And when we yield to Christ, we yield to his will. But here, he voluntarily, and it's a different word. I looked it up, has different meanings, but they translated it yielded. This means to send forth or lay aside. It's similar to the way Bruce uses it, but it's a different word. His life that he possessed, and we just saw in John 10, that he has power to lay it down and to take it up again. And he voluntarily gave up his life at the end of that 3 hours. He willingly made himself that sacrificial lamb that's been talked about all through the Old Testament. But he did it of his own accord. Those lambs didn't volunteer to die. They didn't give up their own life. It was taken from them. But in Jesus' case, he yielded up the ghost. Simple little statement, but I think it's important. All right, now let's go back to Luke 23. And we'll pick up in verse 33. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary. Some of this is going to be repeat, but there's some things in Luke that Matthew doesn't cover. When they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand, one on the left. Then said Jesus, this is the first statement he makes from the cross. We already saw the fourth one, I think? Yep. Remember what just happened. They just drove nails through his hands or wrists and his feet. And remember what we saw in Matthew where they sat and watched? The first thing Jesus said from the cross was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I think he directed that right at the soldiers that carried out the crucifixion. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. We saw that in Matthew. But forgive them, for they know not what they do. And the people stood. Oh, just a minute. Another note. Let me look real quick. Okay. Yes, sorry about that. Go to John 19 now. And we'll pick up in verse 25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, and Mary the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciples standing by, whom he loved, he said unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. In other words, Mom, treat this boy like your own son. I don't know John's family situation. I have no idea any of it. But he says, Woman, behold thy son. Then said he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour that disciple took her unto his own home. We're not told about Joseph or whatever happened to Joseph. Jesus said, yes. I'm sorry, Cassandra, I didn't see you.
You're probably going to say it, but like I said, I would think because Jesus was able to do what he wanted, that Joseph was like no longer alive, and that back then the oldest was responsible for caring for the mother.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he said is like, I'm no longer going to be doing this. It's now your turn. That's the way I take it because of what we know about culture at that time.
I think you're right. I don't know if you could hear Cassandra. In the culture, the oldest would take care of the mother if that situation arose and was necessary. I think there's a little more to that, though, because Jesus had brothers and sisters, but at this time yet, they weren't believers, and he wanted his mom to have the care of a God-fearing man. Can I say it that way? And I'm speculating on that too, but it sure makes sense. John, you need to watch out for her because my brothers and sisters aren't going to do it properly yet. They're going to believe later, but at this particular time they don't. And he wants his mom in good hands. But I think you're right. That was the culture, and he had to make sure something was set up for provision for his mom. All right. Oh, this is pitiful. I had all these papers marking my spots, and they're all laying up here now. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this. I am not good at this. Okay, let's go on a little bit in Luke. Luke 23, right? Where I had a paper. You should see the piling system I have at home. No, I didn't say filing system. All right, back to Luke. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also with them derided him, saying, he saved others, let him save himself if he be Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, if thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, Hebrew, this is the King of the Jews. And one of the malefactors which were hanging railed on him, saying, if thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, does not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? Remember back in Matthew, we saw that both of them were getting on Jesus when they were first crucified. Now, I don't know how much time's gone by here, but one of them, all he had to go on was what was being said and watching Jesus and listen to the couple comments he made and listening to what everyone else said. But this guy had a change of heart. And we will say just in the nick of time, because of what Jesus is going to tell him. Does not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. One of those two guys on the cross finally, and I mean just in the nick of time, and Jesus said unto him, this is the second thing he said from the cross, verily, verily, I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. So if anyone ever tells you there's no such thing as a deathbed confession, tell them to read this. I'm not going to say it happens every day, but this guy understood and accepted Jesus at the last moment. And Jesus said, you'll be with me in paradise today. That's comforting. That is so comforting. And it was about the 6th hour. So we're still early in this. And there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. Now that just spanned the whole 3 hours, because the veil in the temple was rent when Jesus died. Or at the time he okay, let's keep going. The sun was dark and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And he, having said thus, he gave up the ghost. It says he yielded up the ghost in Matthew. Here he gave up. It means the same thing. He willingly gave up his life. But when he says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit, this is not very long after he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? When he I think yelled that statement, his fellowship with his Father had been broken. And the wrath of God, and that's not even recorded other than that I know of anyway, other than back in Isaiah, and I think we won't look at it today because we're out of time. But that shows me here that after he suffered and took the wrath of man, that's what we spent the last last week and part of this week looking at the wrath that man put on him, and then the wrath of God, we see in that statement, and that's the last statement that he makes. We'll have to come back and look at the others that we missed. But that shows me that that relationship's been restored. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. He's back in relationship with God. Not that he ever stopped trusting him, but I think that's when the payment was made, and the wrath of God was satisfied. We're going to see that word satisfied in Isaiah. The relationship was restored. What a wonderful plan. I guess I'm going to close with this statement. Carl Ross is the chaplain at Cass County Jail and has been for years. Good guy, loves the Lord and loves those people in there. But he made a statement years ago that I really appreciate, and I never looked at it this way. And he's told people that for years and years and years, but he says God was willing to pay a very high price to be able to offer you salvation. And that's the way it's an offer. I think we understand that. Some of the people sitting listening to him week after week don't understand that. But salvation is an offer, and the price that was paid so that God could offer that to everyone. Pretty amazing. Anyway, we'll stop there for today. We're a couple minutes late. We'll come back next week and I'll reorganize my papers and look at the few other statements Jesus made while he was on the cross, and then we'll continue with Matthew. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your plan for us, for Jesus' willingness to be part of that, and as Brother Ross says, the price that you considered us worthy paying for. Lord, thank you for that. Help that to, I know it's changed our lives, but help it to continue to change our lives. Thank you again. In Jesus' name, amen.